Hey everyone, Dr. Hill here. Wanted to give you a brief introduction to social scientific criticism for Scripture as well as for the New Testament. Let me just walk through a little bit of the PDF that you have available for yourself on Canvas. And you are reading Stephen Barton's chapter, Social Scientific Criticism, Historical Criticism and Social Scientific Perspective in the New Testament Studies. That's chapter 3. And I just wanted to say a little bit about this as we kind of walk through. We talked about historical critical methods or just historical backgrounds. And there's historical backgrounds deals a little bit more with just the time period, who's in charge, who's in power, who are kings, who are influencers during that time, kind of a larger level. In a lot of ways, historical backgrounds deal with the elite of society and noting that it's the powerful who tell the story essentially. But when we talk about social scientific backgrounds, it's kind of a subset of historical critical work and theory. But the idea behind social scientific backgrounds is a little bit more of the idea of not so much the elite, but the day to day experience of people in the ancient world. And so as you can see, the influence of historical critical method. Historical criticism is important theologically because it has the potential for making us aware of the culturally conditioned nature of the New Testament and the interpretations of the text. And so one of the things that historical critical method as well as social scientific method helps us to understand is not only is the Bible, we read it from a perspective of faith, and we believe that it is saying something true about all time, about the nature of who God is. But at the same time, it has this kind of divine voice to it, but there's also a sense in which the voice of Scripture is a very human voice. And so, because it is a human voices that write this, that the contents are historically conditioned, so that the historical, cultural, linguistic circumstances in what is produced, it is it's shaped the formation of text. And so getting behind the text, not only into the history behind the text, but also just the everyday life of the text, helps us to understand that just the words on the page might not necessarily be identical with what has come to be known as a plain or straightforward reading. And so just in terms of social scientific criticism and a little bit about how it differentiates, how it differs from just a straight historical critical method, is social scientific approaches ask questions that are not entirely about the historical situation, and they are more about, like I said, the everyday life. So questions about boundary questions like, does this person belong at this meal? Meal settings are a really interesting sociological phenomena. And to ask the question, what across all time does it imply that someone is participating in a meal with someone? And then maybe helpful having taking that rubric and superimposing it onto a meal setting in the New Testament or the Old Testament and asking questions, where does this story cross boundaries? Where does it challenge authority issues? Where does it redefine status and role? These are not, again, this is not as much about, like, is Herod the king of Israel when Jesus is born? That's a historical question, but a social question or a social scientific or a socioeconomic question is, who belongs in this setting? And so asking questions like that helps us to get really, as they talk about below, this idea of a thick description of a text. It's kind of reading between the lines, filling the gaps of a narrative. And so all of these things we talked about: ritual questions, literary questions with social implications. So the rhetoric of a passage: how is a passage accomplishing what it is accomplishing, and why in that world is that sort of rhetoric accomplishing that? So, like, for example, one of the what I did my dissertation on was the question about the language and rhetoric about inheritances and giving and receiving them in the ancient world, and how does that play into the author of Hebrews' argument and warnings in the book of Hebrews. And so it's not entirely a historical question, so to speak. It you can see how that it kind of narrows that down into rhetoric and the social expectations of what it means to be an heir or a testator, and what does that imply. So yes, this is a subcategory of the historical critical method and the historical backgrounds, but we wanted to take a little bit of extra time, and it deserves its own lecture and its own treatment. And so I just wanted to say a couple things and give you some resources about that. So one of the ways of thinking about this, these kind of questions, what Wayne Meeks calls the hermeneutics of social embodiment, that these are not just theological texts, but they are embodied actions. So, what are the unspoken but real obligations between parties in a text? What role does, say, meal sharing play in a community? What sort of rhetoric is being used by an author to compel the audience? And how does authority function in a text and in a community? And there are some examples below, and you could look at, like John the Baptist is a really interesting social phenomena of what is he doing out at the Jordan River? Why? Who is he challenging by offering forgiveness by means of baptism? Like, how does that challenge the temple structure, priests, et cetera, et cetera? So you might also, if you take a look at 1 Corinthians 11 and the Lord's Supper, that the Lord's Supper is not just about this theological idea of the Eucharist, it is also about how is it that you're gathering? What's the manner in which you're gathering? So these are sociological questions. And so if you want to explore this world, and again, as we kind of wind this down, if you do want to explore this world, let me give you a few resources. There are a few resources that are very helpful. So this book, Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity by David De Silva, is a really good introduction to the social world of the New Testament. One of the nice things about all of these books is that they do have indexes at the end where you can look up subjects, and if you have a specific subject in mind, you can explore it there. So this is one of the most recent, David De Silva, Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity, Unlocking New Testament Culture. Some of the standard bearers in this, Wayne Meeks, The First Urban Christians, The Social World of the Apostle Paul. This is really good, but it does focus on Pauline studies. If you do want another kind of a precursor to De Silva's book, is The New Testament World. It's in his third edition, you can see up here, by Bruce Molina. And this is another good kind of one-stop, all the different topics across the board in the New Testament. Bruce Molina is a good introduction. If you are looking for maybe something a little more specific, there are a lot of ways. If you're looking at the Gospels, this is The Social Setting of Jesus in the Gospels. It's an edited volume, and it goes kind of category by category. It's a compilation of papers that were presented. This is really helpful for the Gospels, just in the social setting of Jesus and what he's accomplishing and the world in which he's living, a little bit behind the text, between the lines of the text there. I really like the work of Kenneth Bailey, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, and I think he also has a volume, Paul Through Mediterranean Eyes. And Bailey has been good because he's taken Middle Eastern sociological phenomena and sociocultural phenomena and kind of gone back and superimposed those on the gospel to help understand what it is that Jesus may be doing in some of these texts. So you can look at that. Here's another person, a kind of a banner carrier, Jerome Nere, The Social World of Luke Acts. And there are a number of also what we might call sociological. I'm going to grab this one. This is Ben Witherington. He's kind of, his career has surrounded a lot of the socio-rhetorical commentaries. This is his on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, but you'll oftentimes find commentaries that talk about a socio-rhetorical commentary. So like David De Silva's in Hebrews is very similar as well. But one of the things about these commentaries, and just a word of warning, there are, and we'll go back to the limits and dangers of sociological interpretation. one of the things that you might find if you read socio-cultural or socio-rhetorical commentaries as opposed to exegetical or more critical commentaries is simply the fact that socio-rhetorical commentaries and socio-rhetorical criticism is not really about the theology of a text. It's really about the embodiment of the text. And so, if you are looking for kind of a rich theological approach, sociology has a tendency to kind of deconstruct texts, not build theology. So, for all, I've really appreciated sociocultural, socioeconomic criticism and those insights into the text. But at the same time, if you're looking for a theological, kind of a rich theological commentary, your socio-rhetorical ones might not be your huckleberry on that, simply because they are more deconstructing a text than constructing theology, so to speak. One final danger that we might just pay attention to about sociological interpretation is one of the things, again, it takes, like, take meals for an example, is what does it mean to share a meal together? Today, that means a lot of things. And you could kind of break down meal settings and talk about friendship, and you could even talk about the temperature of the food versus the intimacy of the person, or the place in which you dine as a template about how intimate you can be with people, and what is the most intimate meal you could share together. And I would actually make the argument that leftovers at the kitchen table, sharing that meal might be one of the clearest markers of intimacy in a relationship, even more so than, say, like sharing a Thanksgiving meal together, or sharing, sandwiches on the back patio after some yard work. Like, these are all different. So breaking down the kind of sociological phenomena of meal sharing is significant. But one of the things that sociological interpretation does is it takes those things and it just lifts them out of our day and lands them in the text of Scripture. And sometimes it can be a little anachronistic. It could import 21st century notions back into the text of the New Testament. Now, all that to say, like I said, sociological interpretation has a tendency to deconstruct, be a little bit anachronistic. But I would encourage you to maybe do some reading, explore sociological interpretation. Like I said, if you do want good introductions into this, the New Testament, or Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity, David De Silva, or Bruce Molina's The New Testament World, and begin to take it for a spin in your own interpretation. All right. Hopefully that was helpful, and I will see you all on Canvas.